Hi, welcome to the Vancouver Island Cover Cropping Field Day. I'd like to honor and respectfully recognize that we are on the unceded territory of the Comox Nation, and we are here at Lentelus Farms today in Courtenay, and we're here with Dave, who's going to share some information with us about cover cropping and show us around his farm. Dave, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Dave. I own Lentelus Farms. We're farming a couple hundred acres in the Comox Valley and Kelowna. Most of the land we lease is from Ducks Unlimited, and a big part of the lease agreement is to cover crop our fields for winter wildfowl forage. So the lands that we're looking at today are all cover cropped for trumpeter swans.
Awesome. Well, we hope you enjoy the field day.
Yeah, I've been farming on this piece of property just for 4 years now. My dad and I, Willem, who's hiding in the corner over there. We grow a few different grains, clean our own seed to use as cover crop. And then we also grow feed for our livestock. We kind of incorporate vegetables, livestock, grain, hay into our rotation. And cover crops play a big part of that, building our soils. We use them to smother out weeds where we can. We use them as feed for our livestock, and multiple other uses that we'll get into later in today. It's Delisa.
Hi everyone, I'm Delisa Lewis. I am a farmer in the Cowichan Valley, so grateful to be a visitor today in these territories. And on Dave's farm in particular, my history with Dave goes back to 2014 when I was leading the UBC Farm Practicum in Sustainable Agriculture. Dave was the star student, mine.
And the best instructor.
And the learning together hasn't stopped. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be here with all of you to continue that process. I'm also a research associate and teach part-time at the University of British Columbia. My research focuses on soil health building, and particularly working to fine-tune best management practices for building soil health across different growing regions. And since our farm is on Vancouver Island, I like to spend as much time as possible on other farms and in these field day settings, learning about very specific microclimate and micro-region practices. What are the dates and what are the management practices on the ground? So we'll talk about that in dialogue with all of you today. So with that, we'll turn it back over to Emily, or say hi to Tom.
Good morning. It's good to see you all here. I'm Tom O'Dell. I'm the Regional Agrologist, Ministry of Agriculture for North Vancouver Island. And I'm glad to talk with you today about what information I might be able to provide for you, if there's ag programs that I can hook you up with that might help you solve issues that you're struggling with. I'll talk a little more about my background later on, but it's good to see such a nice turnout, a glorious day, and I'm here to learn as much as anyone, because Dave is obviously doing a spectacular job here, and I want to learn more about cover crops and forage. I also want to put in a plug for Willem's sourdough bread, which is some of the best you can get in the Comox Valley, and that's really saying something.
And we grow the wheat and the rye for that bread as well on the farm here, and clean it, and yeah.
I'm going to pass it back off to Dave and Delisa. They're just going to do a quick sort of this is cover cropping overview together, and then we can head out to the field.
I'll let you start.
Okay, so what we've already heard, thanks for the round of introductions, everybody. So in this circle, we have half a century plus, 40 years, we have so much knowledge and skills and background in building the soils. But for those who are new, there are some new growers as well, and people who are just interested in the how, but also the why. The why of cover cropping goes back to what a few of us mentioned, which is cover cropping is one of the key practices for building soil health. So in terms of soil health rules of thumb, when we talk about rule number 1, it is keep the soil covered. Beyond that, we have planning for diversity. We also have reduce where you can mechanical disturbance, and someone else, the third, I always forget the third one. In any case, those 3 are super important and part of this, the why behind cover cropping, keeping the soil covered, particularly in our climate where we have extreme rainfall, extreme precipitation during the winter months. An open soil is subject to losses and transformation that equate to losses on your farm. So cover crop is the practice of keeping the soil covered, usually with an intentionally planned vegetation cover. This can happen in any season, but research, particularly in temperate climates, tends to point towards overwinter cover crops as bringing the greatest benefit. If your purpose is building soil organic matter, or that part of your soil, the carbon, the dead, dying, decaying part of your soil, that's where the juicy bits are. That's where nutrients are held in interactions that keep your productivity levels up. So overwinter cover cropping is likely to be the biggest piece of our focus today. And in terms of how, I'm going to turn it to Dave to have him just walk through a step-by-step of planning the cover crop seed, the cover crop rate, the cover crop timing, the way you establish that cover crop, and then the last piece is termination. So in a broad sense, research also tells us that the significant influence on cover crop success, if again your plan is to build soil organic matter, the key pieces are the climate, of course, and the content of the clay content, right? So soil mineralogy has a big effect here. So you need to know your soil texture, and you need to know quite a bit about the climate as well. In our case, hey, it is the equinox. Our day length is just on a downturn like that. Yeah, here we go downhill. So different strategies for cover crops that you can establish before August 31st, between September 1st and 15th, and importantly, here we are, this last stretch. What happens between September 15th and October 1st is where the rubber hits the road. So speaking of that, I'm going to turn it to Dave, who I'm just going to say from my personal experience with Dave, he is not afraid of experimenting. No one could say this is not a risk-averse person. So know that you need to, if you are a conservative decision maker, temper his incredible optimism with whatever you know about your own conditions. I'm just prefacing it with you there.
So yeah, I cover crop year round because we do so many random different things on this farm. We're growing veggies, we're growing grain, we're growing hay, we're grazing livestock. There's so many moving parts that a lot of it is just kind of reactionary, but we do put as much planning into it as we can, obviously, as well. We've got our plan, what we're going to be doing next year. Dave, what you were mentioning about getting rid of terminating cover crop in the spring.
I'm thinking of fall rye when you have wet ground, you can't get on it early in the spring, and you don't want to spray, of course. By the time you get to it, it's really hard to get a clean seed bed.
No, and that's so that's why I'm switching up from things like fall rye. I do plant a lot of fall rye, and Glenn, I know you've done. My dad actually had a roller crimper built at a farm he was managing, and Glenn bought the roller crimper, so it'll be interesting to hear his experience on terminating fall rye and seeding into that. But we'll go look at one of the cover crops I seeded after garlic this year, and the reason I planted it the cover crop that I did, a big part of it was to just get the soil covered as quickly as possible. But I want to be able to terminate that and plant into that early next year. And it needs to be, fall rye would create too much sod for us to deal with. It would be too much organic matter. So we're not trying to build, it's not an organic matter builder per se that we're using that cover crop for. It's a brassica mix. So we're trying to get rid of, well, one, cover the soil, two, compaction. So we've got a lot of things with big tap roots that are going to break up compaction in there. And three, it's going to winter kill. So we're going to have a lot of green foliage. We're going to graze that down once with lambs, and then it will probably regrow, and the trumpeter swans will munch on it for a little bit. But the soil will be covered for the whole season. But by spring, it's just going to be dead, decaying, and we'll be able to come in and we'll be able to plant directly into that. We won't, no tillage required for that.
That's the thing with fall rye. It's like this high, and you have to mow it and round bale it just to get it out of the way, so then you can start
before you can
till,
yeah. No, I struggled with that, especially when I first got into kind of farming for myself. You know, I just done the year with Delisa and a couple other amazing folks who were really introducing me to cover crops. I've always been around cover crops. My dad's farmed for 40 years using cover crops, but doing it for myself, I was like, yes, I'm going to plant as much as I can, like as using vetch and fall rye, and I didn't have the equipment to incorporate it. And I was like, what do you do on a smaller scale? Like I started with just a few acres, and yeah, using weed whackers to knock it down before you can get in there with like a rototiller to seed veggies was insane. So yeah, just kind of looking at different cover crops and using what we can to do different things. I think a lot of people get stuck with fall rye is what we cover crop with, and that's it. That's what you do in this area. And there's so many other options.
So now that we've heard from Dave and Delisa, they've given us a really awesome overview of cover cropping. We heard from some of the farmers who joined us today. They let us know why they joined us, what they're hoping to get out of this field day, where they're from, and now we're going to rejoin everybody back out in the field.
So basically with a crop like garlic, we want to get something on the ground as quickly as possible. I grew it for a couple different reasons. One to get just the ground covered. Two, it's going to be forage for lambs who are not supposed to just be wandering around the field. Usually we kind of move them around with electric netting, but it's been a long summer and I'm tired, and they're enjoying themselves. Yeah, so it grows really quickly. This has been growing, it's 3 weeks now since I seeded this. We probably should have used the no-till drill that's owned by the Farmers Institute, so anybody in the valley can rent the no-till drill. It's, I think, $15 an acre, which is amazing that we have a resource like that available to us. Yeah, this mix that we're growing here, it comes from Union Forage in Alberta, which I can't recommend them enough. They're amazing to work with, a great seed company, lots of different mixes, and they just, yeah, they think out of the box, which is really nice. So they've got pre-mixed things, they can mix things for you, they can find you tons of different seed. So this is, it's a couple different kinds of turnips, a couple different kinds of tillage radish, fodder rape, and yeah, it grows really quickly, 3 weeks. We've irrigated it twice. We are lucky to have tons of water on this farm. So yeah, and it's way overseeded. This is way too thick. Waste of seed, but yeah, it's definitely.
How much?
I probably put about close to 20 pounds on here, and it probably only needs about 5 pounds. So, but I was doing it all by hand. I was just flinging it out one evening. I was like, I gotta get this done. I'm not gonna go get the drill. It would have taken me longer to go get the drill and get back here and take it back and clean it. And for such a small area, it's, yeah, I didn't even bother put my I've got a broadcast spreader I could have done it with, and we mixed in a little bit of grain. I think I put wheat in this cover crop, I sometimes forget because I just kind of grab what's closest because we clean a lot of our own seed, and I wanted to have a bit of grain in. I'm pretty sure.
I see a bit of rye in here that sprouted amidst it.
Yeah, I think a couple buckets of rye maybe in there, and some peas. There should be peas in here, but they're definitely not doing as well. Like the brassicas, that's the beauty of planting brassicas. Like that's, I guess, a tillage radish, and it's already like that size in 3 weeks. Like it's going to be monstrous. I've used brassica mixes in grazing mixes as well for livestock, especially my chickens. I find it just kind of sucks everything up, and they go nuts for it, and it just provides so much volume so quickly. Yeah, that it's a really nice one to add to the mix. Yeah, any questions on?
Which company did you say you bought your seed from?
Union Forage. They're based out of Alberta, but I think it takes like 3 or 4 days to ship stuff here, and they'll ship what I'm buying my grass seed from them. I just bought a pallet of peas from them as well, because that was 5 acres of peas that is no more. Thank you, geese. Which we would have combined, but the idea was, okay, it would be a cover crop if it wasn't a really nice looking crop and there were too many weeds in there, but it came up with hardly a weed in the stand. I was like, this should be perfect for combining. It was just a little too green to combine. We don't have a dryer. I should have just gone to Glen. And yeah, I left for a week and I came back and half of it was just kind of trampled down and eaten. And I just mowed this little section because this is where we're going to put our garlic this year. So I just, again, it's getting rid of cover crop. So mowing it, we'll put a ton of compost down on there, and I'll irrigate it again, and we'll start working it up and getting it ready for garlic beds. But having peas, so it's peas and then a little bit of oats in that mix. So the idea, garlic is a heavy feeder, needs a lot of nitrogen. So growing something like peas, which is a nitrogen fixer, is going to provide some nitrogen for those plants. And Union Forage also provides inoculant for all your peas and vetch and all your other legumes, which was really hard to get a few years in Canada. I don't know if it's easily available now anywhere else. I've just been getting it from Union because it was easy. Yeah.
Dave, can you tell us about the soil here? Did I miss that? Soil texture?
Delisa, do you want to tell us about the soil? She knows more about the soil than I do.
Well, you can go to the soil sift page and get the exact soil series and type, but I can look around and pretty well discern that we're in a soil with a good deal of dynamics in terms of challenges for mechanical cultivation, given the relative level of stoniness, but we're also in a floodplain, so there's going to be a silt or clay content or both in terms of the texture piece. And this is our first discernment, deciding whether this is a silt loam or is it a qualicum loam. But I think we have an element of loam. And some challenges with drainage. You can look at the stand and see where issues with root permeability are going to cause a problem through time, just in terms of a uniform stand. So where you see the crop not vigorously producing and spreading out, you see problems with the interactions, the soil mineralogy and drainage, and that takes us right back to the soil texture. But Dave has already been, walking you through essentially his decision-making matrix around how to decide what seed to plant for cover on the soil, and how to decide how to get that seed on the ground, and how then to decide how to terminate the seed, and what the key to all of these pieces tying it together is, what's the purpose of cover and what's your opportunity in terms of timing, right? So those are the pieces that take you from, you know, Katie mentioned the challenges with, we've got this web of information out there. There's a huge amount of information on cover crops, cover crop reference tables all across Canada. This is building in terms of the province of British Columbia. Shortly we'll have a nice report that collates cover crop for the province of British Columbia. But for now, understand, as others of you have alluded to, I think it was Glenn, like, look, if you just do this by the book tells you, or a recipe for cover cropping, particularly over winter, that on an affordability basis, fall rye and some type of legume on an 80%, 20% basis is the cheap and cheerful way to make this happen. However, all of those trade-offs that you see down the line in terms of wireworm impacts, in terms of termination, and losing everything you built because of the tie-up of that soil carbon when you want to get that nutrient kickback. So, as Dave mentioned, these decisions around, you can pull back on that 80% rye to get good cover. You could pull that down to 20%, say, the later you get, just to have some quick cover, and then begin to experiment on your site and for your own purposes. We're using winter wheat is a great one. He's talking about, we've also had oats and barley. All are great cereals to mix somewhere in that 70% to 80% ratio with the leguminous cover crop, and the range from vetch to crimson clover to red clover, a great one. The red clover gives you one of the highest biomass ratios for seed. It's affordable, it's available here on the island, and each one of them, you'll learn through experience, gives you, where you want a whole lot of biomass in the winter, you want it to go away quickly in the spring. And so you can play with those ratios of cereal grains. Know that rye gives you the most biomass, so if you dial that down and you want it to go away earlier in the spring, if you have a higher clay content in your soil or poor drainage, you want to dial that down so that some of it winter kills and you can get in again in the spring quite a bit sooner with a lot less destruction from the tillage in the spring. Does that make any sense to your...
Yeah, and that's, yeah, so the big reason for the tillage radish is to help with drainage on this site, because that's what we struggle with. This is estuary land. I'm pretty sure we might be below sea level right here, or very close to. And having those roots, like, we're going to have root systems that are big, thick, roots that are going in. They're going to start rotting. They're going to basically decompose, and we'll be able to get in here and plant spring potatoes in this field really early. And I'm not going to have to... I'll probably do one light pass with the rototiller, a couple inches deep, so I'm not really buggering kind of my soil structure in here. And then we will just come in and seed, plant our potatoes, a little single row potato planter, and that's that, done. Yeah.
Well, yeah, you also mentioned the great thing about these brassica cover crops for you was essentially a 30-day or less turnaround to see it grow. Yeah. But your system is planned to be, you've got this integrated crop livestock system. You have diversity in your system, so your strategy is a particularly high amount of diversity.
And that's also a termination strategy for cover crops with having livestock. If you've got cattle, if you've got sheep, anything that's going to graze it down, it's an amazing way to turn your cover crop into manure, put it back into your soil. I use that all the time. And then also if you need feed, like, this is something that grows so quickly, and you have, like, I've got, there'll be many tons of feed on this little area in a month's time when there's not much left in the fields for things to graze. We'll have, a few days of grazing anyway on this little site. But just having that flexibility, being able to to get feed quickly, especially in years where we're struggling, if there's, with our crazy climate, when we've got heat waves or insane wet springs, and we didn't seed any grain this spring other than oats and peas on this little site. Usually I lease another farm by those green bales over there. Back there, there's 60 acres, which we usually plant to grain. This year we just grazed it. We couldn't get on to seed any crops, so short on grain, so I'm buying in grain now for pigs, which not so fun this year. Shot up a few $100 a ton, so not making me too happy. It was definitely the year to grow grain. A little choked I wasn't able to. But that being said, I really wish I had just seeded it late. Glenn always makes fun of me for worrying about, I want to always get it in by the end of April, but you can plant it later. I put a lot of oats. If you see the sunflowers up at the top over there, that was oats, wheat, and sunflowers that I think you guys all seeded by hand, and the grain looks beautiful. Like, I really wish I'd done it on a larger scale so we could have combined it. So again, I was too risk averse on that one. I really should have just gone for it and seeded it. Anyway.
Did you till, like, after you pulled the garlic, did you till it all, and then once you seeded, did you have to work it in at all, or?
Yeah, so Matt actually rototilled it, and then Scott broke the rototiller. But we did one pass basically to kind of level it all out, smooth it out a bit, and then seeded by hand. And there's an ancient old little drag harrow over there that I put behind the ATV, and I seeded, zoomed up and down once, threw the sprinkler on, and was growing a few days later. And yeah.
So do you think it would have come up without water?
Maybe not. No, I don't think so. It was dry. It was just a powder that we had. And then I did try, like on this section over here, that was full rye that again I was going to combine, but I didn't feel like pulling the combine out this year after that all went to shit. So I just cut and baled it off the field. And then I broadcasted the same mix but on a much lighter rate just on top of the soil, and didn't incorporate it at all, just to kind of see as an experiment to see what would happen. And that all got irrigated at the same time as this. There's like 3 things that popped up, so you need to get that seed to soil contact in order for it to actually germinate. So I just wasted some seed there and made some geese happy.
So when you broadcast it, you rolled after that?
On this one I didn't bother hook the roller up, which I should have, because it's just lying right there. I just used the drag after light rototill, seed, and the water that we just have. So the irrigation gun does such a good job of kind of packing it all down. Or also, if I didn't irrigate immediately after seeding, I would have rolled it.
If you didn't have the animals to terminate, what would you have done differently?
Then I pick crops like this, which will winter kill, because I've always struggled with terminating cover crops without having the right equipment. Like, in an ideal world where you have flail mowers, you have everything, and you can just hook up and go. I don't have a flail mower, I've got a brush hog, and they just do a horrible job compared to a flail mower for chopping up cover crops. My dad did a lot of cover crop in between vineyards in the Okanagan, and they had flail mowers that would come through, and that's how they would terminate their cover crops in between the rows. Just picking crops that will winter kill or are slightly easier to terminate. They don't have as much biomass. So instead of planting full rye, which like the stuff that I had there was again 6-7 feet when I cut it, you could plant like a dwarf variety of grain that's only going to grow up 18 inches or so. Doing something like that, just if soil organic matter isn't your main goal. Like on these fields, yes, I want to always build my soil organic matter, but I'm already looking at 13-14% in these fields, which is amazing. So I'm not too worried about adding too much more soil organic matter, because it is in a really good place. These soils are super varied. Like we've got the hillside over there, which they're super wet spots, but then there are also really high dry gravel banks up there. Then we come down, and just on the other side of the tractor, that's just a lake throughout the winter. And then we've got a lake that kind of goes through the middle, as Delisa pointed out, like right in the middle of this field. It dips down, and yeah, it just floods out there. So always kind of playing around with where we are on the farm and what we're doing.
Yeah. When you're tilling in a cover crop like this, how do you choose the depth? Do you just let it eat, or do you just try to till just enough to get, you wanted it level?
Yeah, so I want to go as shallow as possible to incorporate it. So what I'll often do is I use a deep ripper with 2 tines. So I'll come in with that, which gets down about 2 feet. And that's just breaking up compaction a bit. And I feel, creating it's better for your soil structure. You don't want to be, well, I do plow as well. Like there are fields that I moldboard plow, and then we'll flip it 8 inches, we'll go down, flip it, and that's to kind of terminate, incorporate. But on a cover crop like this one, for instance, I will go in probably 2 inches with the rototiller in the spring, and that's all I'll do to incorporate something like this. Yeah.
Are there any cover crops that you've used to grow with your other crops to control weeds?
Yeah, so we use a lot of white clover in between our veggie beds. You do have to mow it a few times. So yeah, it's not like in with the crop. But again, that's something my dad has done more of. I know he's experimented with soybeans and peas, growing that with asparagus, like in the actual thing to smother out over winter. And then again with vineyards, he's done the same thing, kind of planting right in the rows.
How do you kind of control the competition between them for nutrients?
Yeah, so you basically, you're growing it at certain times of the year. So you'll do something in the winter for a vineyard, for instance, and then terminate in the spring. And yeah, I'm often growing things like legumes to add nitrogen, for if I'm adding it to a crop. But I'm usually, you'll have, over there you'll see a lot of weeds with an attempted cover crop in between the squash and the pumpkins. So you've got your area that is, we use a lot of plastic mulch over there. So the pumpkin's got its area, it's got its fertilizer in its spot, and then we're just kind of cover cropping in between the rows just to build soil in an area that will get worked up next year and replanted. Yeah.
There's a lot of buzz these days about buckwheat for wireworm control. Have you experimented with that at all?
I have experimented a little with buckwheat, and again, it was something I just struggled to terminate. It grows too damn well. Like the stuff gets. I actually remember seeing a field of Glenn's. Maybe he should tell you about buckwheat, because that stuff is something else. It's
you have to terminate it before it flowers.
Yeah.
Or just as it flowers, or it goes to a vicious wheat.
Yeah.
Vicious.
Yeah, buckwheat. I let it go too late as well, and then some of it went to seed, and we still have buckwheat in our fields. So I think again, it's just timing, and you really have to. Like the nice thing with buckwheat, it provides bee forage, which is amazing we have bees on the farm as well. A friend of mine does honey here. So it's a kind of a time when nothing else is really in bloom. So yeah, bees go nuts for it. But then you leave it, you get distracted for a week and you have to do something else, and it's like, oh, whoops. I find the flooding really helps with wireworm as well, where it really takes care of the wireworm. We've been most of these fields kind of get worked up quite a bit, and that seems to be what really deals with wireworm is tillage. Mustards, we've used mustards before as well with wireworm, but I lost 40 acres of barley 3 years ago due to wireworm. They destroyed it. We were going from sod to grain, plowed it under, seeded it, looked at it, it's like, this is not good, and then ended up going with treated seed that year, so that we could actually get a grain crop off of it. And that's basically why I'm not organic. I'd like to be. Again, my dad has farmed certified organic farms most of his life, but having a tool like treated seed in your arsenal to beat a crop like wireworm, I have just found is really important for myself in being here next year and able to pay the bills. I don't always have 10 years to kind of build and fight things. I sometimes just have to do what I have to do in order to make it to the next year. So Lisa, what are your thoughts on wireworm and cover cropping?
My thoughts. I will say that as a certified organic vegetable grower, I have sort of stuck with the tools of cultural and timing management pieces to reduce and minimize impacts. But with respect to the conversation on the cover crop, the rye, this cheap and cheerful solution of fast germinating fall rye, also, yes, I've definitely experienced the impacts of a heavy rye cover and a resurgence of population. So from the time that we turned our sod into vegetable crops, there were 3 years that we waited for specific crops that we knew would be high impact and lose marketability for. But after that period, we've had much less impact. I know that there are some farms and some soils in this valley where wireworms do not seem to go away. And so your strategies would then turn to some of our resources that we have here on site. And I would say Bonnie Zand here, who's been across the region with monitoring and scouting, and there was some key info on wireworms just this year. What's the big learning this season with wireworms, Bonnie?
I don't know. What is the big learning with wireworms this season? We didn't actually look at wireworms for our project, but I know there has been a lot of work been going on with wireworms, especially Todd has been doing a lot of work on different ways of monitoring for wireworms and looking at some different fungal pathogens, entomopathogenic fungus that you can try and control your wireworms that way, but it is a really long game. A lot of this stuff is looking at trying to manage adult wireworm, and so that's where if you're going to be putting in something like a rye cover crop, those adult wireworms, so those are click beetles. For anyone that doesn't know, the adult of a wireworm is a beetle, and it's going to be attracted to those grassy rye cover crops where it's going to be laying eggs. And once those wireworm are in your soil, they can take like 5 years to go from being a larva to being an adult. And so it's definitely cover cropping can impact what you're seeing on your farm. But I'm not sure is there something specific and new, Delisa?
No, I'd forgotten that in your program, because of all the work that Todd had done, that was one of the pests you weren't monitoring. Sorry about that. I just know that for marketability, the wireworm is a key pest on Vancouver Island. So many vegetable growers focus on brassica crops and root crops for our soils, but the relationship to the wireworm and management of the cover crops, selection of the seed that you choose for your cover crops, those pieces are all integrated. And it's integrated also in terms of, we've got integrated pest management decision making, but also integrated weed management. And if one of the strategies and purposes of growing cover crop for you is also weed management, there has been some recent research around pest and predator populations for people who've been using cover crop residues as weed suppression. So the research basically showing that better together would be some organic herbicides, if that's the system you're using, or other type of herbicide plus the cover crop residue in order to, you know, so maximize your predators or the good bugs on your farm. In the case of an organic farming system, the relatively new released organic herbicides used in they're non-target basically, and so you don't lose large populations of beneficials while using these herbicides, but the control and the impacts, every decision you make on the farm, but particularly those that have impacts on large and diverse populations of organisms like tillage, because what we have is cultural practices, meaning delaying planting, choosing cultivars. We also have structural planting, structural practices or high impact practices such as tillage to control wireworm, to control it, right? Aside from the treated seeds. So with tillage, we know that over time you're chewing up your soil organic matter. The reason for that is you are reducing the home of the wireworm. And so in looking at it from an integrated nutrient management perspective, many organic farming or ecologically minded farming systems utilize also compost in their systems. Compost applied in the fall, compost applied every time you do tillage. And the compost is also a source of home, a source of food for those wireworms. So when you know more about your soils and the relative percentage of organic matter that's in your soils based on the lineage of geological parent material and those inherited properties, you can also make decisions, as Dave does and I do, to sort of temper what does it mean to be careful about tillage when you're balancing pests and weeds and cover on your soil. So you're basically triangulating amongst all of these factors, and over time, and we've had the opportunity over these past 2 seasons, all of us who are making decisions on the ground, to go from extreme dry to extreme wet and extreme cold. And let me tell you, these decisions around which seed to select and how to get it in the ground, they're incredibly influenced by all of these external factors. So I think it might be a good idea to hear from the knowledge and experience of growers right here. What have you done to temper? I know we've got a huge Amara farm contingent here, and I know that there are struggles there. So, you know, lessons learned or successes and just some tips and tricks. If you've got any to share, that'd be great.
Yeah, you're right. The variability year to year makes it challenging. And I think a lot of other farmers, like, you're trying to balance, you know, your profitability and what crops you can get in, but trying to establish cover crops as well. And I'm sure you'll talk about the timing more, but that always feels like a trade-off at Amara, knowing we have these like very wet falls and winters, as well as we're in a bit of a cold zone. So we've had frost the last few mornings early. So thinking about is it probable to try to establish like a proper cover crop at this time when you have your crops out of the field, or do you sacrifice area to make that a cover crop and just not grow something for the benefit of having that cover crop? So that's always a bit of a toss-up, but I think we've just seen it be very wet, very cold, so even trying to establish a fall cover crop isn't feasible. So we've moved more to tarping or like spring cover cropping in lieu of like trying to have a robust cover crop in the fall. But it's always challenging because every area on the farm is so different. So I don't have an answer, and it feels very like reactionary year to year. So it's kind of nice to be like, okay, this establishes quickly. Maybe that's an option for us to do something like this. And then, yeah, so I don't have a great answer, but a lot more soil coverage by silage tarp seems to work for us, given our area, and then try to do more spring cover crops to get the benefit of it. But yeah, I don't know if Alex has anything to add to that.
I think the key connection that you make for us, Katie, is that like cover crops are part of your whole farm plan. They're part of crop rotation. And so when you already know, I know that these are the best drained sections of my farm and I need them for the spring, you need to pull out all tools in your arsenal. And so the last time I was lucky enough to be in the Comox Valley, I was actually here as a part of a field day looking at this comparison between cover crops and tarps on vegetable farms like Amara, and really kind of working through all the different ways to keep the cover soil. And in some contexts, the tarps are a great tool for just preserving some of the soil structure over winter when you know you need to get in there, because if you don't start in the spring at the time, again, just as Dave alluded to, you want to be here next year. We're talking about long-term economic sustainability as well as environmental stewardship. So thank you so much for that. It is an ongoing, yeah, we're reacting to these extreme changes, and the more that we know from each other about how the timing and management decisions, lessons learned, sort of is shifting, where that baseline is shifting, the better prepared we'll all be as a part of this adaptation. So I'm going to put it back to you, Dave, in terms of, you know, I mentioned 3 different windows of cover crop timing, and a lot of that is coming from research in Southwest BC. But what have you learned here in the last 4 years about the first and maybe the mid and the last point, so when you can actually find success here?
Yeah, so in the spring we try to get cover crops in. If there's a section of the farm that we aren't going to be using, maybe it's where we're planting squash, and squash is only going in mid-June, and there's a window where we can plant something quickly in the spring. We might do something like oats, which you can get in a lot earlier than most other grains. They grow, yeah, in cool soils a lot faster, I find, than most other things. So we, yep.
And because the specifics are important, the devil's in the details. How do you get those spring cover crops in if you're still rolling into a wet spring? What's your technique?
Yeah, so if it's too wet, not getting in there, but if it's a smaller area and it's something that we can, if I don't need to work up the soil, something like a no-till drill, which we have over there, not having to work up soil and just go in over top of something like this where it's been cover crop the year before, and the geese or the wildfowl, something has kind of knocked it down, we can go straight through that with the drill and seed something into it. Same as this, like it's going to allow us to get on the field earlier without creating too much. It all depends. If it's too wet, we can't get on the field, but if it's dry enough, where we've got the soil kind of covered, it's got its armor on top of it, we're not going to create massive ruts, then we can get in on something like this with a no-till drill. And then we're planting a lot of cover crops for our beneficial insects as well in the spring. So we try add things like wildflowers into the mix. And then I use a lot of sunflowers. They're just cheap. You buy a bag of the black oilseed sunflowers from Sharecare or one of the feed stores, add a few of those to the mix, makes the farm look pretty, bees are happy. And yeah, sunflowers are they capture a lot of nutrients in the soil. They're a different kind of, yeah, they grow really tall and they're taking up different space, covering different soil. Yeah, just an extra random thing we like to add to the, I really like to add 4+. 4 is kind of minimum for me on things that we grow in a cover crop mix. I don't like just seeding full rye. It's boring, one. And two, we're always trying to do multiple beneficial things with our cover cropping program. So, you know, I might, with the full rye, I'm going to throw some peas in now and inoculate those. They'll probably grow a little bit. We won't get a ton out of them, but they'll grow, fix a little bit of nitrogen in the soil for next year. So always just add in more things. And I'm going to throw a few brassica seeds in too. I'm just going to seed that little section with the no-till drill later today. And then there's a couple spots where they're growing vegetables this year that I think I can get in, and I'll just drag the drill around and seed in there as well. Yeah, always just trying to add more things to the mix.
Lynn, do you want to maybe? Oh,
Sorry.
yeah.
Not related to what you were saying, but I just had a thought. Do you have any cover crop that's like comparable to like the speed at which this has grown? That's not a brassica, because that's something on a small farm. That's a bit, that's the biggest part of managing our rotation.
Totally. I don't. But Delisa, do you? That is the problem with brassicas in a vegetable rotation. Like it's really hard because brassicas are such a big crop in vegetable production to try and add. Now all of a sudden you've got a whole another brassica crop in there, which just doesn't. Yeah. Is there, what do you?
Let's think about this different size of the seeds that we're using for cover crops. So the cereals are roughly the same size. And so one of the challenges is, of course, that seed to soil contact. And the more contact you need, the larger the seed size. So with peas, for example, you need to go in quite a bit deeper, right? The seed itself is like, 4 or 5 times larger than the cereals. But with brassicas, one of the secrets to the speed is the size of the seed. With clovers, expensive. So we're on an affordability basis, clovers are not anywhere near. They're an order of magnitude more expensive than brassicas. However, they are so easy to get in. They germinate quickly and across a number of conditions, including, they will work. I've seen clover put in a system where just right onto the snow. So this is, Emily mentioned, none of this. There's nothing new under the sun. These cover cropping techniques have been around for hundreds of years, and clover is a standby for fast germination with low to no tillage and across sort of moisture regimes. But the crux of it is how expensive that is, which is why for me, when I'm looking at that range of clovers, my go-to is a cheap and cheerful common red clover. That is the cheapest I've been able to find through island suppliers. But you've got a source, Glenn?
Well, no, I was going to ask you, you say red clover, but there's the two, right? Which one are you promoting?
Not crimson, is that what you mean?
No, red clover. I am under the understanding that the double cut and the single cut are two different varieties.
There are going to be many, and I'm just talking about what our island retailers call common. It is there's a lot of biomass, a big hairy, and that's the cheapest I've found here, but there are many, and we looked at a number of these in Southwest BC. Which ones have you used on your farm?
I've only used the double cut, but I understand, I stand to be corrected by anyone here, I understand that's a biannual, and the single cut is an annual. And that's my understanding.
That'd be mine as well. I'm not going to dispute that. And it can be difficult to terminate if it's a really thick stand and you need to get in and terminate it, but it will establish quickly. But if you, one strategy I've used on the vegetable system in a much smaller scale for those of you who are gardening or getting started, if you've got seeds that are aging out, And you know, any kind of smaller seed, fast germinating seed outside of that brassica family will work as a spring or other cover. So I have gone to that as well. So we've got affordability in the decision-making matrix, also just accessibility of that seed. You need to get it quickly.
You just gave me an idea. We got a whole big bucket of old carrot seed I might try with a fun little cover crop next year.
It's not expensive when you need to get rid of it anyway, right?
We're just a small farm, and we have a rototiller that's 4 feet wide or something, and we usually that concentrates bed, right?
Yeah.
And the pathways that we're working towards is just white clover. Is that going to work for us, or? I mean, we mow the pathways.
Yeah, so we've got there's some strawberries in the back where we use white clover in between the rows, and then we do we had a bunch of alliums that we planted way in the back over there, that white clover in between, and the idea was we were working up that field, but we want to have permanent raised beds. It's gonna be a bit of a smaller market garden kind of going on in the back with minimal tillage is the idea. So yeah, white clover that gets mowed 2 or 3 times a year, and then the beds we're just going to top dress with compost, and that's
we'll keep doing it.
Yeah. No, I think it's works for us.
Dave, how does this crop deal with frost?
It will winter kill eventually when it gets too cold. And that's what we want. I want it to grow as quickly as possible, and then I'll graze as much of it as I can, and then frost will take it out, kill it when it gets too cold.
When has that typically been?
Usually, like, it's still going, because I know I had chickens outside on a brassica cover crop, say 2 years ago, almost up until end of November. And then it only really died off, I think, in January, February, when it got really, really cold. But it died off completely. Yeah.
Will you get any blooms off of it before it winter kills this fall?
Balloons?
Blooms, yeah. Will any of it go to flower?
I doubt it. And the reason it won't is because we're going to graze it. And that's kind of a strategy in itself as well, is just to graze it down. And we do that with other cover crops as well. So I'll graze it, if I've got rye in here, I'll graze it down in the spring, let it regrow again, and then work it into the soil or cut it for feed.
But it's brassicas, so any stragglers are going to pop up, right? Anything. They're crazy. The survival of the fittest here. We want to make seed and flower.
Yeah, there's probably a few of them going to flower.
Yeah, it's fast.
So,
I don't know of anybody who uses sorghum Sudan grass in this zone.
Yeah, a friend of mine, Ross Springford, down in the Noose, he's been playing with sorghum Sudan and loves the stuff. Yeah, it grows amazing in the summer, gets huge yields out of it. I want to give it a try next year because I need to do something else too.
The only place I've seen it is Indiana. Vegetable operations in Indiana, but it was like summertime, fast growing, huge amounts of biomass, but I've heard maybe seed is a challenge.
Well, we used it in California, and since BC is the new California, it's coming. No, I hope not. I'm sorry about that. Yes.
If someone's curious, out in Ontario, it's Orchard Hill Farm. It's Ken Lang. He's been doing a lot of experimenting with like cover cropping, the sort of Sudan grass and grazing on it. And he's not super on the internet, but he is out there a little bit. It's Orchard Hill Farm. He's got a lot going on out there.
Just for the recording, Orchard Hill Farm?
Yeah.
Great, thank you so much.
I think it's definitely like warmer than here, but not by much, and they get pretty harsh winters. Yeah, just if someone's curious, might be worth.
Yeah. No, I know my friend down in the Noose, just about 40 minutes south of here, is having amazing success with it, and he's growing it as more forage. So he's planting it in the summer after, I think he took a cut of grass off, worked it up, planted sorghum Sudan in late June, early July this year, and then got, yeah, a really good cut out of it. So, yeah, I'll try it next year and let you guys know.
I think it just may be one of those for now that needs a niche, a location on your farm where you can get the longer growing period in order to capture the heat days. We've got some heat days. It's just a matter of which year and when they start. And so, you know, the engine of all of this is 10 degrees Celsius. So I'll be interested to see how this day measures out in numbers of these 10 to 15 with the pests and other life in the soil and the flora and fauna that drives all the interactions in the soil. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how many of these we get, because goodness, August has been quite a change from the beginning of the season this year. Yeah.
So I know there's nitrogen fixing cover crops. Are there cover crops that can help with other nutrients as well?
You know, the mix of nutrients that you get is part of that building. In general terms, part of building the soil organic matter is part of that mix. But in terms of specific nutrients, there's a dynamic between nitrogen and phosphorus, but directly I can't say that there's a direct relationship between the cover crops and your phosphorus bank availability. No. But there's a relationship between how well your cover crops grow and the biomass that's created and the nutrients that are available at the time. And so it is one reason why some people have as a part of their seed establishment adding compost or other nutrients with the cover crop. So depending on what you're going in with, there will be linkages to what you come out with. Good question.
I did have one other. It's if anyone has experience with this. Is there a certain cover crop that deer do not like eating?
Yeah.
I manage the cover crop in a deer fenced area and I'm very avid patrolling that. So I don't have experience with cover crop that, you know, are the deer hungry? In a year like this, you know, the deer have had a lot of other things to do because we've had so much grass and so many other places where they can be and eat and, you know, basically get their life on. But in a summer that's challenged with water and drought and available feed for the deer, if you don't have the exclusion of them, I'm going to say it'd be quite the challenge, Dave.
Yeah, I've had no luck. They always get me every year. But they're not my main pest. My main pest are the Canada geese on my fields. Like they knocked down this 5 acres of peas there in literally a couple days. So if the deer come in and munch a few, I'm like, that's all good. There's not too many of them. Yeah. No, you're not deer fenced for your vines?
Oh, we are.
Oh yeah, and they still manage to get in there. Yeah. I helped my dad with fencing in Summerhill Winery. Deer fencing the whole way around. It was, and they still managed to get in. There's always one or two, and the cattle guards and everything. Yeah, nice. Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about cover crop establishment with and without irrigation? What can you do without irrigation?
Without irrigation? I don't. Well, then it's basically a timing thing, right? So you're waiting in the fall till you have a little bit of moisture, but you can't wait too late or else your cover crop's not going to establish really well, and you won't be able to get on the field. So that's always a balancing act. I'm very fortunate to have water on this farm, but then the one over there's no irrigation on that one. So generally I seed later on that one. This year we're just going to put in we have put in some 4-eye in areas, and other areas clover has just taken over because we left a bunch of it fallow this year and just like couldn't get into it. Wasn't worthwhile doing too much. Mowed it down once, cut and baled it, and it's too late to do much there. What are your...
I mean, in a year like this, if you don't have irrigation, Angela, the practical reality is that your rate of seed, the amount of seed that you have to put in starting from August 31st and then going into the mid zone that we just passed, you basically go from, I'm just going to use rye as a reference point, or barley or wheat, the cereal piece here, like 100 pounds to an acre in the first zone to 125 to 135 or more. And depending on how you're seeding that rate needs to go even higher. So if you're doing all of the things that are much more challenging for establishment, which means like here we are September 20th, we're waiting for some amount of rain this weekend. You still want to get cover crop seed in. You're trying to beat the birds. You don't have irrigation. Let's just say, because there are these scenarios out there. So the rate of seed has to be higher. The type of seed, there's some trade-offs there. You're going to need to put in some fall rye. And I would say if you're broadcasting on top of not having irrigation, let's just say you go up 50% to 150 pounds to an acre or more with that mix. And certainly you want to include some clovers and some small seeds in there and some value for that. Because I have had this situation, but usually by the second week of October, you're really not going to get much happening other than fall rye or the clover. So that planning for diversity piece, that mix of a whole lot of different seeds, the viable options just go down the hill as you start to take these out. Irrigation is key when we've got this August-September dry spell. Has there been any other experience on the ground here with working without irrigation to establish fall cover or other kind of cover crop seeds?
We just did a peas oats. Just tilled it, threw it on the ground right before rain, and grew. The deer loved it.
Awesome. If you're harnessing any bit of moisture that comes in, so any showers or anything, so you're watching that forecast, that'd be my advice as well. Just anything. We've got 30% chance of showers. Get at the ready. If you got 60, bring out the guns. So that is it. You know, that rainfall advantage.
Glenn, what's been your experience with? I know it. Been a year or two now where you've been using the roller crimper and then seeding into that. And
well, the 1 year on radish it worked very well.
Yeah.
But this year we tried it on rye that wasn't quite in the flower, and it didn't work that well. No. I understand it's got to be in the flower stage, and we jumped the gun, and it wasn't, and it did not work. It didn't work well.
And that was just like a termination thing? Yeah, it just wasn't terminating well. And then you no-tilled straight into that? Yeah. What did you seed?
Oats and peas. Okay. Yeah. Just as an interesting aside, when everybody talks about cover crops, they always talk multiple mixes, right? Yeah. Multiple mixes, everybody. We went to a regenerative farm in Alberta, a successful, I might add, because you could see his crops, and he swore with just red clover, and that was all he would do. Yeah. That's it. And he was successful with it, and that we're certainly going to try that this year.
There are places where it is just the right thing, and just even as a oneer, but yeah, that's interesting. I would like to see that.
That's probably one of the main reasons I like farming, that it is so specific to somebody's land. Like you can come out to a field day and you can see what works for me, but it might not necessarily work for you. So much depends on your microclimate, your soils. There's so many different factors, and I think that's that's kind of why I farm. There's always new things to learn. There's always, yeah, more to figure out and experiment with. I probably experiment too much, but it's kind of fun. Keeps me going. Yeah.
Can you elaborate on the timeline a little more? You said you were going to still plant some cover crops, but is there like a time where it's too late?
Yes.
You plant them right after you harvest? You planted this one right after your garlic?
Yeah, so I try to get cover crops on as soon as I can, depending on what's growing there. And like, for instance, the squash that we had growing there, I think we seeded oats, peas, and then a little bit of the brassica mix and some clover. I think we used white clover on that stand. So we seeded that the last time we could go through before like the tendrils of the squash plants were into the pathways. So that was, I think, mid-July. Didn't do that great. Mostly weeds growing over there, but now the peas are starting to come up, and at least there'll be something. We'll pull the plastic off the squash probably only in October. So we're getting really late for cover cropping at that point, but we've got moisture on our side at that point. So we'll probably only use a little bit of fall rye because we have that other kind of mix that's growing, and there's a bunch of weeds, which are still weeds. They're not an intentional cover crop, but they're still going to do a job of protecting from erosion, and that's our main concern on that field. Another puddle field is what I call that one. Most of it is underwater for winter, so I just want to have the soil covered as early as I can. Yeah, just so.
Do you shift your squash over for the next year? You don't?
Yeah, so squash will probably come into this field next year. Probably actually have them over there. We'll just do, yeah. We're scaling back on.
Sorry, but the spot you're growing squash right now because you don't have a cover crop on them currently. What do you do with it over the winter?
Yeah, so there's a cover crop in between the beds. So basically you got your bed here, and then you got your in between the beds. So there is a big section that is cover crop, but right where the bed is, we're going to broadcast fall rye over the entire area. So we can go in with our tractor and broadcast, and I often do it when it is starting to get too wet, because you're really playing with the weather by the time you get your squash and your pumpkins off. It's the same with kind of corn harvesting. Like, it's a struggle to get your cover crop in before it's too wet.
I have squash and they're late, so I'm wondering what is the latest point you can plant that fall rye for it to be successful?
The latest I've planted it is the first week of October, but I'm sure it kind of depends on your microclimate and how late do you think?
October 15th for the desperate, but higher rate of seeding at that point.
Yeah, and then with broadcasting as well, right? You seed quite a lot higher than you would with the no-till drill. So that's the benefits of having something like a drill. You can use quite a bit less seed.
But you're also talking about a crop that is often grown in plastic culture. Do you use the black plastic mulch? So if you don't use that, like one of the strategies that we've used, again, it's not the ideal tool, but it may be a tool that a number of growers go to just to keep the soil a cover on the soil, is to keep that plastic in place. We just pull the plants or let them go right there, depending on how late. But for the winter squash, we often just have the plastic culture on as the cover, instead of do a little bit of rye where there's any bare soil, and then that's the combo. They're sort of like.
Do you do a spring cover crop then? Or?
Nope, that's just for the fall. But in the spring, we pull it out and work it again.
Just covering it is enough. You don't need to do anything on top of it.
With the plastic, there are dynamics that happen through the winter, but that is just one way to keep an actual cover and protect some of the ground. Again, we just finished a round of research in Vancouver Island looking at comparing cover crops and tarps, but a lot of farmers are using mixed strategies, and that's just one that we've gone to on our 40-acre farm, where we've got any of the crops that have value, you're pulling them into October, you're marketing late in the fall. That's where the decisions are difficult. And impossible on our silt loam soils to really get a good establishment with cover crop. So we leave the plastic in place in that case. Yeah, thank you for your question.
So I might actually leave the plastic on again this year in that area. If Delisa does it, it must be fine, so I'm gonna do it.
It's a horrible job in the spring, but it's all right for the fall.
So this field over here, we tried growing grain in it for the last 3 years, and we have picked so many rocks, so many rocks, that I'm done trying to grow an annual crop up here. It's just not feasible. So this year, I think it was the first week of June, we tried seeding a mix of a few different grasses. I think it was orchard timothy, tall fescue, and perennial ryegrass. And then we added AC Truman alfalfa to the mix as well, which is like a wet foot tolerant I think it's a blend of 4, right, Etienne? Of different alfalfas, maybe? Yeah, which one did I get? I don't know. There was, yeah, it's definitely, it was AC Truman that I got and put into this field just on a lighter rate to kind of see what it would do. And in some areas it's done really well, in others it hasn't. Again, the soil is so different on this field. Like right where I'm standing, you know, I can push the probe in like so. Now I'm hitting a rock, but up there it wouldn't even go in half an inch. And yeah, the changes in the soils on this piece are, yeah, there's so many differences, and that's why we're going for large, like I'm not just going to seed orchard grass. I want to seed things that are going to grow kind of at different times in the summer, so that we can get grazing out of it the entire summer long. Spring, and this is also going to, the reason we're irrigating right now is to try get a little bit of grass for our flock of sheep that will come over here. We've got a few little lambs running around, but we've got 50 ewes on the other farm that we'll bring over for grazing in October on this field. And then next year this will be more of a rotational grazed field is kind of the idea behind this one, because it's close to kind of the barn and facilities. Yeah, but Delisa, did you want to tell people soil stuff?
Are there, just to help me a bit, are there specific soil stuff questions? Any questions about the soil? I mean, I can stand here and engage and enjoy talking with you all about soil formation factors, because we happen to be in a landscape position that lends us great possibilities in that conversation. But if you are on a small area or a large area and you have the opportunity to look across a landscape like this, Dave's talking about the different soils and soils across the farm. Like, look, topography is one of the key soil forming factors, as well as, you know, one of the things we've been talking about over and over again, the climate itself. Then we have the organisms, both plant and animal organisms, as well as, of course, I like to look to the mountains here. We've got this beautiful view. So geological parent materials, whatever was a part of, whether it's the 3rd or the 4th glaciation, is this glacial till, or, you know, a lot of the cobbles here are telling me that some of the deposition factors are fluvio-glacial in these soils. So the translocation happening that way. So if you look all the way across this, and visualize the parent materials, the climate, the organisms, and this topography and aspect interacting through time, then you can get a picture of the history, the past of this soil, and what happens over time in terms of your management and changes. Whatever practices you have on the land also change the soil. We've been focusing on cover crops today and the way cover crops, you know, for many of us, the key purpose in trying to integrate cover crops into the crop rotation, or thinking about it as part of your whole farm plan. The reason for this is to continue to either try and build or to maintain soil organic matter or soil carbon. And there are reasons for that that include environmental stewardship as well as sheer economics on the farm, right? And today we can also experience the social activity, the social part of sustainability for all of us is just getting out here together on the farm field day. But yeah, if you look across here, we can probably see a mix of, I would guess, through the contours here, there are probably at least 3 different soil associations in larger terms. There may be more on a micro scale, but all of these are going to interact in the ways and in the limits and opportunities that Dave has to make decisions about which seed, which crop, what's the timing, and what's the method of getting those seeds in the ground. Yeah, as far as what you see when we've got this level or lack of soil moisture from grabbing that probe right there, you know, the very top piece of this, just like your, I'll just wait. I don't have the voice that carries like Dave, so, you know, the soil horizons and what you see with a soil probe or a shovel into the ground, you know, you're gonna start with the organic part of the soil or the carbon piece there. I can learn more with this activity as far as investigating the soil in the spring and early summer when the moisture levels are higher. There's a little bit more that's revealed. When the soil moisture is zapped, it's more difficult to see life in the soil or interactions between that air and water balance. Right now, there's not much air and water balance in the soil, so it's difficult to get the probe in. So you know that just as when it's too wet, the tillage practices can also be very, very damaging. So for those of us, or for any of you who are waiting to get cover crops in the ground and incorporate those because it's too dry to till, we go from too wet to too dry to till. Again, just keep an eye on that next rainfall event and raise those discs high and light as much as you can. On smaller areas, you might want to use, often I'll use just the rototiller but not turned on. We literally just use that rototiller to tamp the seeds into the ground, particularly with larger seeds such as peas. So I just roll the tiller across when I'm using larger seeds to get that good seed to soil contact. It creates less dust, but you really get them in a bit deeper. And so the dryness is as big a management challenge for establishing cover crop as the moisture from my experience. And so what we're seeing here is quite a bit of dryness across the slope, even with the irrigation that Dave's managed to bring in
a lot of water.
The big guns, so literally, very big guns. But yeah, if there are specific questions about the other parts of the soil or the relationships to soil management, yeah.
Do you ever pull a soil sample and then choose and plant a cover crop according to its needs, or is it more of a practical sense, like this crop came off, got to get something going, this is what's going to establish quick?
That's interesting. So most of the soil sampling, so if you're using a regime of a program, say, or a planned use of the tool of soil sampling and analysis, just like choosing to deploy cover crops on your farm, when you're deciding how to best use soil testing, you want to figure out what is your purpose of the soil test. And so for those of us who are cash crops or vegetables, I also grow forage and hay, but for the vegetables, the higher value crop, cash crop on our farm, my soil sampling program consists of annual spring. Basically, as soon as the soil gets close to that 10 degrees Celsius point, I will systematically sample the soil and send those samples off to the lab. I have the other advantage of being part of a research collaboration and have access to great soil labs, but I also have a long-term relationship with a particular soil lab that I've been using as a part of our soil testing program on our farm. So my purpose in soil testing is to find out what is the relative index of nutrient availability for the crops I'm planting for a particular area where I've sampled for a particular year. Or if there are a lot of growers who use fall sampling to find out what was the actual fate of the nutrients we applied. Did we go too far? Do we have nutrients we need to absorb in the fall? Are there any environmental impacts from what we did? And or how can we better save both our money and reduce the inputs that we're paying for? So that's a post-harvest sampling program. I have not used soil sampling to determine which cover crops to use. It's really more along the lines of deciding this, what are my timing opportunities and the limits of each different type of cover crop seed we might have to choose from. But the soil samples are really about getting for me and the analysis, that's about getting a broad sense of the soil chemical properties and the availability for me for that growing season. It's a great question. Thanks for...
What is the lab?
I use a Pacific Soil Analysis out of Richmond. It's an old school lab that I've used since doing field research across the Lower Mainland, Southwest BC. But we also used it up in for soil samples all the way up to the Bella Coola Valley. They are so old school that computers and emails are a little bit slow for them, but finally there's the second generation. If you want your results emailed, you can now get them emailed to you. It's been a long time coming for them.
It has been a long time.
It's been a long time coming. The other lab that we use on Vancouver Island is the Ministry of Environment lab. I'm not certain that's actually a viable choice for general public, but that's the other one we use. For a brief moment, there was a lab on Salt Spring Island, and I was so hopeful that we were going to get a regional viable soil lab that lasted a couple years, and then they moved to the cannabis world. So sad to say that I had to go back to and continue, but it's crucial to use a lab, like basically choose when you're going to sample at the same time to the same depth for the purpose that, you're asking a specific question. If it's about soil fertility for annuals, you sample to 0 to 15 centimeters. Same time, same depth, same laboratory, so you can learn what their methods are and what extractions they're using, and over time begin to understand for your particular farm, what's the relationship between these levels of nutrients and the rates that we're applying. There's a lot of guidance out there through the Ministry of Agriculture. There's some nutrient management pages through the Soil Sustainability branch. There's some great resources out there. Nutrient management handbook and many others that give step-by-step procedures of how to take a good sample, because you're wasting time and money if you don't take a good sample, if you don't send it to a lab where there's a correlation between the results they give and the soils and area and region you're in. You send that sample off to Illinois, I'm sorry. I can't give a good interpretation of their extraction and that relationship between their numbers and what we got going on right here. We've got half a century of experience in the province with having that correlation between their extraction methods and what's going on here. So rely as much as you can on our provincial labs, and I'm going to turn to the ministry folks and say, boost up those provincial laboratories so we have that tool as a viable piece. Other questions about the soil? Yeah.
nutrients?
You know,
You're
as an
focused on
organic
macro,
farmer,
or are
the
there
first
particular
things I learned
micronutrients
to
you're
really
concerned about
monitor
for your
over time
particular
is
situation?
actually the soil organic matter and the pH. These are key variables and things that I could understand as I was just beginning as a grower and really had no background in chemistry. Over the next decade or so in my growing experience, I started to take those chemistry courses and go through soil science and begin to understand a bit more about, you know, beyond those master variables that all organic farmers look at, and start to look at those macronutrients. I can say that the scientific evidence and those correlation and interpretations are much stronger. There's a lot more science there for looking at those and making decisions about those. But the other pieces, if you are working within a system and using other forms of those nutrients, whether it's composts or manures, more complicated, lower analysis nutrients, if that's your tool for adding nutrients year by year in an annual system, we're talking about that, then you know, it is the micronutrient piece is going to come from the more the low analysis, broader spectrum products. There are lots of growers who have very high value crops that need those micronutrients and really need to understand through tissue testing and others how to fine tune that. But I don't work at that level in our vegetable system. And so you know, when I'm looking at it, I really look at where the levels of those macronutrients are going, and are there relationships between key cations, calcium and magnesium, where are those moving? Now I have a little bit more sophisticated analysis, but my background in soils is limited. I don't have the soil biology piece that would allow me to understand more about interactions with the micronutrients and below ground ecology. So I have to keep learning, like all of us. We're here because we're lifelong learners, and maybe a little bit of humility at every step, I hope. Yeah, I don't have all the answers, but I don't also have that much faith in the micronutrient interpretations available on a province-wide basis. I haven't. We're still using our hay on farm. I've sold a bit to other customers, but mostly that's a resource. You know, this year, of course, I hope the rest of you had the at least double or more hay harvest. This year we may do some sales, but you know, those customers, the horse customers have their own questions. Let's not go there. Let's not go there. What are those questions? Yeah, horse customers and hay. Okay. I'm just going to put my head down there.
If you do need it though, we do have soil probe and we do have hay core at the ministry office that's available for anyone to borrow and use. So if you did want to do sampling and you can't get a hold of Dave to use his tool, you can always contact Tom, and it's just a sign in, sign out at the service center office.
Cool, we got you covered.
Perfect.
Yeah. Right. And locally, where would you take that? Do you have a feed store where they'll give you the analysis for the hay?
Yeah, Top Shelf, and then I think at least last year, 2 years ago, people were also taking it to Black Creek Farm and Feed, and some of the horse people were taking their samples there. Yeah,
it's Top Shelf for us in the Cowichan Valley too. So they're sending it to a lab.
We soil tested and we leaf tested the same fields, and a lot of them corresponded, but a lot of it did not jive.
Right.
It did not jive. I was really surprised. It's not a straight line.
No.
We've got to do it next year too, but some nutrients, the soil was deficient and that the plants had plenty, or within whatever the buzzword is, it was acceptable.
Yeah, yeah. So those nutrients are moving through that system, and it's fascinating trying to get it's not a straight line, but the timing is moving and moving. And it would be, if you're going to test again, similar to the soil sampling, it would be a great idea to try to get the timing similar so you have a baseline of samples that begin to tell you something. That would be great.
What lab was that? Not stay in the soil after you sample it very well. Nitrogen in particular, right? Highly volatile. So
yeah.
Well, that's interesting. It said our soil was terribly nitrogen deficient, and yet this plant sample was a low. You know, it's not. That was one of the better ones.
what lab was that, Glenn?
In A&L.
A&L.
In Ontario.
Yeah. Fascinating. Fascinating stuff.
You mentioned about dry soil, working dry soil.
Mm-hmm.
What are the cons of, like, if let's say Dave was to try to plow this right now, what would?
Well, I mean,
good luck.
Yeah, aside from wear and tear on equipment, let's talk about what happens to the soil. So soil, when you work it when it's too wet and you get compaction and you're concerned about this soil, and there's also losses, a greater risk to loss through erosion. So there are many different forms of erosion, and if I don't think anyone here remembers the Great Dust Bowl, but let me tell you that a lot of soil loss happens this way as well. You'll lose soil, and the similar kinds of compaction issues can happen. You've got to be, if you're intervening in the soil, so let's just, without this nice image of soil, when we're talking about it, always have in mind this kind of pie chart piece. So soil are the minerals, the parent material, also air and water, and then this slice of organic matter. So these are the components of your soil, and whether you're talking about managing a compost pile or your soil or whatever it is, to the extent that we can intervene, we're either directly adding to or changing the balance between water and air. If we're irrigating, we're doing this. And then managing that interface, like the impacts of management on that organic matter slice are huge, but the impacts on the structure of your soil, depending on where that air and water are in that balancing act, that's where it really causes problems with aggregation, and then just you could be more and more choked over time. And the more you know about your soil texture, where you start with respect to how much clay or silt, the mineralogy piece, that gives you a sense of how much room you have to move when your soil is too wet or too dry. So you can do the boot test. Can you walk? Can you drive? You get really itchy in the spring, and I sort of inch the tractor a little bit. Now what's happening? Yeah, some ruts. How far can I get in? Can I walk? If I can't walk in and my boots get stuck, I know it's not time to even start inching the tractor out. But the same is true when the soil is dry, and I've just been itching to work more ground to get more cover crop in. But I know that, okay, so I mow it and there's a dust cloud. Gosh, it's not time. I'm going to wait for a little bit more rainfall to come in. Otherwise, the impacts are kind of the same on that opposite scale. Some severe losses can happen through working the soil, you know, and you're just fighting yourself. You're just fighting yourself. So, but the coarser textured soil you have, the more sand in the soil or rocks or whatever you've got. If you've got a fast draining soil, your texture will tell you you've got a much longer window to work that soil in your sort of balance of air and water.
Right.
Yeah. What kind of soil do you have?
It's loam, sandy loam.
So you've got a pretty big window of workability, right?
Yeah,
That's great.
It's the usual, though. There's a few little wet spots.
Yeah. Some low-lying areas where it just sort of sits. Well, that's, yeah, but a loamy sand, sandy loam is a pretty nice middle ground there for a workability window there.
Yeah.
Great.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Other questions? Yeah.
I know we can borrow the probe, but where would I get like a good probe? Because I've looked so many places and I can't find a good one.
This one, I think I actually the college got this one for me. So I don't know.
depending on your soil texture too, you may, there are lots of, probes that are used by scientists, like an oak field probe. You can go to like Haskins Pro, and there are a number of places you can get those. But you can also use some tools just like a hori-hori knife or a tree planting shovel. If you're sampling in turf, I'm going to suggest, or drier conditions or tough soil conditions, you may want to start sampling with an 18-inch tree shovel.
There's a tree planting shovel in the back of the.
Those work pretty well as well. You just need to be able to get through the top organic level, whatever turf or cover on the soil, get that aside and go to your 15 or 30 centimeters, depending again on the purpose of your sampling. But often what happens with these, like this is a nice sturdy one. Auger probes are also used by soil scientists, people doing the post-harvest sampling in the fall. You need that kind of turning to get that sample in there. So again, it just kind of depends on your purpose with the sampling. But if you're just getting started and want to have a look at the soil, sometimes the hand tools and the shovels are the way to go.
After taking some time to hear from Dave and Lisa out in the field and answer questions, we gave Ever an opportunity to wander, and then we took a short break. And now we're going to head inside. We're going to hear from Tom. He's our regional agrologist in the area, and he's going to talk to us about ministry programs and how the ministry supports farmers in this area.
My goal here is just to give you an overview of the Ministry of Agriculture and what kinds of assistance we might be able to offer you. And I'll also preface this by saying I'm new on the job. I still have a lot to learn. It's a phenomenal amount of resources available through our ministry that I'm still coming to grips with. And luckily, Angela Boss is also here. She's the team lead for the South Coast and Vancouver Island. Did she bike off? No, she's still hanging in the wings there. The mandate of the ministry has three major pillars right now. That's Grow BC, Feed BC, Buy BC. And the Grow BC is still being fleshed out, but you may have heard about Feed BC. And if you're a larger grower, this is a potential way to access markets for your products. It's an effort to get more of our institutions in the province to use BC grown food. If you're trying to get into a hospital, other school, these kinds of larger buyers, it can be challenging. So this is an effort the ministry has underway. I can't give you all the ins and outs. If that's something of interest, contact me. I have business cards on the table and I can get you more info. And then Buy BC is a branding effort so that people, when they're in the grocery store and elsewhere, can see that it came from our province and therefore have the opportunity to select BC produce other sources when they are available. And mostly building consumer awareness and demand for our local products. And I think we're getting some traction on this. I think there's a lot of buzz about local food, and this is a key piece of food sovereignty as we go forward.
Maybe I could say something else.
Sure, Gary.
There's, we get people with low incomes, and a lot of new mothers get coupons worth $3 a coupon, and we get at least half of our income based around young women and young families with the coupons, right? So,
excellent.
One day we get $400 from coupons, which is funded by the provincial government, and we're happy to get it.
All right, so here we have a farmer who's getting a revenue stream based on the provincial subsidies. The ministry has a wide diversity of expertise, everything from the marketing to the environmental side, to people who are looking at plant and animal diseases, food safety. My position is to try to connect people, to try to connect people with those other resources. The regional agrologists are the forward-facing part of the ministry that people can go to when they have either particular questions or if there are conflicts that are arising. Part of our job is to inform people about, for example, the rules on ALR lands when their neighbor is complaining about something, and what are the avenues, aside from, obviously, you want to talk to your neighbor and try to work things out, but if you don't get there that way, what are the other avenues of conflict resolution, and what is the actual regulation and information? How do you get that information that you need? Luckily haven't been having a lot of those kinds of calls yet, but I understand some of the regional agrologists do get them quite frequently. There are 17 regional agrologists around the province, and each one has a specific area that they're working in. I'm responsible for north of Nanaimo, including Port Alberni, northward on the island. So I feel really lucky to be in this position. I'm really glad. I have teammates on the island, all hired. We were all starting around the beginning of July this year. It's a new team, and people that I admire and respect that I am really enjoying working with. So I'm glad about that. Within our branch, we also have a resource management unit that has more expertise on the soil and water side of things. And we have the industry development unit, which is more involved in business planning, marketing, and other aspects. The industry specialists are in that group. The regional development unit is the regional agrologists, and then there's a land use planning group as well. You may have heard of the agricultural land use inventory, those soil maps. They come from that unit, and they're constantly trying to update that as well as figure out how much of that land is being used for farming. And of course, all these people have different expertise in different areas that have application to agriculture in some way, shape, or form, from integrated pest management to business planning and succession planning, and so on. I did have, as we mentioned, a slideshow. I'm just moving through it quickly because I can't show you all the detail, and I'm not going to just read off my slides. Don't do it that way. Myself, as I mentioned, I'm working in northern Vancouver Island. My background is in mycology and horticulture. I have a PhD in botany and plant pathology, and I've worked as a grower for the last 12 years in our small nursery. We have a wholesale nursery. We've supplied a lot of the trees for new hazelnut orchards over the last decade in the whole province. And I also have some expertise in agroecology. I worked in that role for the ministry for a couple of years back. Tree crops are my passion, and one of my superpowers is plant tissue culture, or tissue culture in general. I can grow plants like they were mushrooms on nutrient agar, and that's how I produce a lot of native or food perennials. Our hazelnut trees are produced on agar before we harden them off and then grow them in larger pots. And I also grow mushrooms. Sometimes I have a number of little projects I'm always doing on the side because I'm so fascinated with it. So if you have particular technical questions in those areas, I can really drill in for you. But like I say, I think my main role is to, if you have questions or needs, it's my role to find out what the programs or people are who can help you out through the ministry or through other branches of the government. Let's see, and another big part of my job is helping organize events like this and finding champions for them like Dave, so we can have places for people to meet, learn new skills, and share information. I think this event has been really a tremendous success for the amount of networking I'm seeing going on and the amount of sharing of information. Like, we don't look at this as a top-down, we're going to give you the answers. We need to work together to find the information and find solutions and talk to people who've been through the same kinds of challenges that you're going through now, potentially. Like, I don't know much about forage or fodder. It is the #1 crop in BC on a per area basis. Something like 70 or 80% of agricultural lands that are being cultivated have hay or some form of forage or pasture. It's huge. It might even be higher than that. That's not my area of expertise, but we were lucky to have Dave hosting this and a number of people who've been doing cover cropping for decades as people who would show up and share their knowledge. And to me, that's the best kind of learning that we can have. Being in a field with knowledgeable people who have experience. And it's my goal to make more of that kind of stuff happen. And if you have ideas about knowledge transfer, extension events, learning events, or topics that you're really interested in or passionate about, I'd love to hear about it. We're really fortunate in the ministry right now. There's a push towards more extension kinds of work. And so I'm empowered to do some of that kind of work, and I'm happy to. It's really brings me a lot of pleasure to see these kinds of things happening. Another role that we have is in supporting emergency management. Like Angela is on a provincial emergency team, and most of the regional agrologists spend part of their year backstopping the various emergency services around agricultural issues. Like when there are all these evacuations of livestock, somebody has to help people figure out where those animals are going and how they're going to get fed. And another part of our role is like helping people plan ahead for those kinds of things. So if you have interest in learning more about that, you should reach out, and there are some tools and information I can provide about planning for future emergencies. I wanted to mention a couple of upcoming events. Amara Farm was well represented today. I think they've had to leave now, but they're hosting a hazelnut field day on Sunday, this coming Sunday, September 25th at their farm. You can contact me or look on Facebook. It's being advertised through the various farmers institutes on their Facebook pages. Another information session coming up is for avian influenza. There's a poster on the wall. Another one at the door at Merville Hall for small flocks, which means anybody who's not a quota, really. If you have even a few backyard chickens, you're welcome. It's open to the public. Merville Hall, October 13th, 8:30 to 1. We have the animal health unit people are showing up to give that workshop, and there's another one down in Duncan for people on the more southerly part of the island, and one on Salt Spring that same week. If you're interested in staying informed about the programs and about upcoming events, I would encourage you to sign up for the AgriService BC newsletter. We're also developing an island-specific newsletter. It's still in the early stages, but if you sign up, you'll be informed, and you can get that when it starts coming out. A few other key programs I want to mention. The Environmental Farm Plan. Is everybody here familiar with that? Okay, so you know how to access that. Let's see, we have new entrant programs. I've been talking to a number of you about your questions about getting started and resources for that. Premises ID, that's for people with livestock. And that way, if there is an avian influenza outbreak, you can be contacted and be informed about the current status. Like I know there have been at least 3 more detections in the past week. I think they're primarily in the Fraser Valley, but there may be some in the interior as well. So avian influenza, they're predicting it's going to be on the upswing this fall, and any of you with poultry should definitely keep on top of that. Business development programs are available for farmers at different stages, and I know I need to review that and update my farm plan. It's one of those things that it's hard to make it the top priority when you're trying to keep your plants alive by watering all summer and things like that. But it is still probably the single most important factor in success is having good business skills. There are 2 initiatives that are currently open. or rather one is currently open and one about to open that I want to make sure you know about. One is the knowledge transfer, and that relates to these kinds of events. If you have an idea, if you have an organization that you work with, you can apply for funding for a demonstration, a field day, bring an expert in to provide training or knowledge in some way. There's also extreme weather preparedness that's opening beginning of October. I don't have all the details on that yet, but it's to help people prepare for flooding, fire, and extreme heat. And up to $35,000 for eligible projects, but it's a cost share program, kind of like the environmental farm program. But for example, shade, additional shade for livestock or for horticultural purposes is one thing. Water developments can be included in that. The wildfire preparation, you have to go through an assessment of your current status of your farm in terms of wildfire preparedness, especially your structures. But once you have that, then you can access funding to help improve your infrastructure so you're ready if that happens. Same for flooding. That'll be opening the 1st of October is my understanding. And that's what I have to say. I'm open to questions. Angela's here to help backstop me if you ask questions that I don't know the answer to, which is very likely. And I'm also very interested in your ideas about extension or knowledge transfer events, because we're working on planning for the coming rest of the winter right now, and if there are ideas, I can jump on it pretty quickly.
Thanks so much for joining us in this field day. For the rest of the day, we went downstairs, we checked out some of Dave's seed cleaning equipment, answered a few more questions informally, just chatted until the end of the day. We hope you enjoyed the video. We hope you found it informative and that you got something out of it. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thanks so much.